can see it. Thank you. Lino, right? This is Battleship Gray. This is just for practice cutting, but this is what your tool looks like. All right? So the tool, we tried at the end of last semester to make sure everything was set up absolutely perfectly. So it should rattle like that. That means that it's got the blades inside the handle. All right? Unscrew the back end, and you should have 5 blades. Those blades will all fit this handle. All right, so you can keep all of them in there and just take out the one you want, or you can leave them on your desk, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I usually close it back up so that I have a round end to kind of push against for comfort. But this is the part you have to worry about, is where things are going, where you're actually loading the blades. This can be a little tricky. Once you get the handle of it, it's pretty easy, but the first time you do it, it might throw you off. First of all, there's 3 parts, and as soon as you loosen it, it wants to fall apart, and all those parts roll, and you suddenly think that you broke it. But there should be the handle, the collar, and then these 2 little guys. If you look at them, one is kind of curved, and one looks like a little dot. All right? You guys know what a cyclops is, right? So think of that as the eye and the mouth. Those 2 things go together, right? And it's in between the mouth and the eye that the butt end of your blade is going to go. So that sort of pinches together and holds the blade in place. But that action has to take place inside of the collar. So it's meant to come apart, that's fine. If you take it apart like that, not a big deal. The handle should have the 2 parts in it. I have too much coffee today, my hands are shaking. And then the collar goes around the outside. So just turn it a little bit so it's on there and not super tight, and you can hear it kind of rattling, then you'll know it's fine. If you put the blade in wrong, you'll know. For one thing, the blade, the end that goes in is dull. It's not shiny. The part that cuts you is shiny. You can tell right away. Also, all of the parts that go in are round, right? The other ones have different shapes on the cutter end. The other thing to be aware of is that if you put it in the wrong way, like if you don't get it in between the eye and the mouth, it won't go all the way in, right? So that's kind of obvious. But even here, if you're just distracted and you try to tighten it up, look how weird it looks, right? It's like taking off into space. And also, do you see how it sort of swells in the middle? That kind of belly should rest right against the collar. So that's a good sign right there that you don't have it in the right way. So it takes a little learning how to do it, but basically you are aiming in between the curve and the dot. Now I've got it in the right way. See, the belly is sitting on the collar. Tighten it down, I'm good to go. So this is designed to allow you to have 5 different cutting tools with you all the time. If you have multiple handles, then obviously you could do, 1 blade in each one and like just switch between them really fast. You can use your woodcut tools on lino, but you can't use the lino tools on wood. These are just too soft. You can use a strong tool on a soft material, but you can't use a soft tool on a strong material. All right, so these tools work essentially as gouges. You're meant to be pushing it away from your body. So of course, what most of us are going to do is grab the plate and put our hand there and put a knife there, and do you see what's going to happen immediately? And I'm not throwing shade, but I cut myself the last time I made a lino because I did it at my desk and I didn't get a bench hook and I thought I could handle it and I slid right past and stabbed myself. It's not fun. You'll notice that the woodcut set comes with Band-Aids, right? But I would prefer that we don't hurt ourselves. So about the only time you would ever hear me yell is if you're cutting without this, a bench hook, all right? The bench hook is designed so that one end points down, the opposite end points up, so it will hook onto the end of your table. I'll do it that way, sort of see that. There we go. Hooks onto the end of your table. If you were cutting on a piece of wood, for instance, you could put the wood against the flat end, right? So you can push this way. You can put it that direction, but the really nice feature on these is that there's a 45-degree angle notch in there, right? So the main thing that you need to be aware of is what's the smartest strategy for carving. Because really, there's some things that will make your life a little bit easier if you kind of plan them out a little bit ahead of time. Des, could you see if there is a Sharpie over somewhere in that black bag area? I didn't think I wanted one, and now I just do. Ah, yay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to scooch in a little bit, and I'm going to draw a shape on here. Let's say I want to cut like a crescent moon. All right, and it's meant to be black around the outside. All right, what I would normally do if I was working in lino is switch over to my absolute thinnest tool. This little V-shaped cutter is perfect for what I want to do next. I'm going to break my own rules so that you can see it, but I've got my hand behind the blade. I'm going to cut not the whole shape, but just the border, right, where the white touches the black. And I would do that all the way around. Usually, when I'm working on a curved shape, I'll start at one end and do about half of it, and then turn the plate around so that I don't try to do the whole shape in one stroke. That way you're less likely to overshoot or to cut into something that you don't intend to. So here I'm going to come back from this corner toward where I stopped. Same thing here. Now, I've got kind of a moat or a trench around the outside. Then think of it this way. You want to maximize your use of time. I could keep cutting with this little knife, but it's going to take me for freaking ever to do it. So switch to a bigger mouth blade, and then you should be able to get this cut in just like 2 more strokes. Again, I'm going to start at one end, carve in toward the middle, and stop. Instead of trying to go all the way to the end, flip it back around, and meet myself in the center. Boom. Really pretty easy, and you don't have to cut super deep, all right? For your woodcut, things get a little bit more intense. Your woodcut set, and these are from a company I really like. This is the FlexCut Corporation. They make really great tools. The higher quality woodcut tools have relatively long metal shafts. A cheap tool is going to have a lot of handle and a tiny amount of blade. This one can be sharpened and sharpened and sharpened. This will last for decades, all right? We have several different types of blades in here. We've got a V shape, we have a couple different U shapes. There's also chisels. So this one that's shaped kind of on an angle acts like a chisel, and you can use that to pre-cut those edges, which is even more important when you start working with wood. So, again, this is by far the best design that's ever been done in the history of art, but it's a good demo. You can see I've got curves, straight edges, I've got black things, white things. I have things that have a thin black outline where it's a white shape against a white background, where I have a black shape against a black background. I need a white outline there in order to make the shapes visible to you, right? So in order to cut this effectively, when we get to wood, you really have to remember the wood grain itself, right? It's going to be easy to cut with the grain. Just like petting a dog, right? You know, they don't like it when you go against the grain. It rubs the hair the wrong way, right? When you try to cut across, you're going from softer to denser areas in the wood, and that's going to sometimes catch your knife and make the knife make kind of a tearing cut. So in order to prevent that, I usually utilize either the chisel, which works just fine, or an X-Acto knife. Or you could even use like a pocket knife. That would work too, all right? Let's see if I can do that backwards. All right, I'm gonna try to cut this curve right here and take out this white space in between the black shape and the black shape and this black outline, right? So in this area, I've got a round shape that's going against a bunch of different densities of wood, right? So that would be an area that if I just grabbed a big knife and started trying to gouge it, it would really tear along that edge. So the smartest thing I can do, and obviously I'm working backwards, I would normally be sitting on that end, right, is to do this. Straight in along the curve that you are trying to make. Whether it's with this tool, it's a little more challenging with this guy, but you can use kind of the tip to carve straight in. With this one though, I can cut the straight edge here really easy. What I normally do is kind of angle it so that the cut that I'm making acts a little bit like a mesa, like the side of a flat topped area, right? So I'm going from the black into the white a little bit on an angle into the white, and I can press in and move the knife, and that's pretty easy. I can do the same thing to this guy, right? Because I've got a thin black line there. So I can cut from the black toward the white on an angle that way. And then from the black toward the white, the opposite way. I think I'll probably do this tip as well, just for the heck of it. And there as well. Okay. Now all I've done really is put essentially kind of straight cuts in. I haven't really opened it up much. If I were to ink it, you might see a little tiny white line there, but probably not much. So my next step is to go along the cuts that I've made with my thinnest V-shaped blade. And here you'll notice I'm going against the grain this way, right? So normally if I did this without pre-cutting that edge, it would just rip. So now if I do that, I should get a much smoother cut. Nice, yeah? It doesn't have all that jaggedy fuzziness on the edge of the cut there, which it would if I hadn't taken that precaution. This is gonna be an easier cut because I'm going with the grain. I can just kind of be in that little trench I made and just widen it up. Nice and easy, right? I still don't like to go all the way from one end to another because sometimes you run out of energy and you slip and you suddenly cut where you don't intend to. So I usually try to go from one end about 3/4 of the way or half the way, and then come back, start at the opposite end to meet myself so I don't make a big mess. Get that going there, all right? So now I have a little trench cut kind of inside that white shape. I can do the outside of that line. Nice. I can do against the grain, following that trench that I made here. And now the challenging one really is the curve. Again, easier to do if I was using this facing me, but so be it. More awkward than I thought it would be. There we go. All right, now that I've cut that trench, I can switch over to the bigger tools. So think of it like if you were digging a hole or if you were shoveling snow. You wouldn't like try to shovel with a spoon, right? You'll be there forever. So use the bigger tools for the bigger jobs. Now that I have those little trenches, I can start from one, try to follow the grain as much as possible, and I'm going across the wood about halfway. I'm not trying to go all the way to the end because then I might accidentally cut through. But once those are cut, I can come back and go like so, start from the opposite trench, meet myself in the middle. And did you see that little action right there where I sort of, right? I hit the last part that I cut and went into, and then it stops because there's a trench there to catch me. I didn't accidentally cut into the black, right? You can do the same thing in here. And you notice I'm not cutting really deep. I mean, you can see those shavings that are coming out are not super deep. You do not have to cut really, really hugely deep. But this is what I normally do, is try to go in and do either the tightest shapes first, the areas that are the most challenging. Sometimes I save the big white stuff for the end because it's the easiest to cut. Other days, if I'm feeling kind of like I need to like build up my self-confidence, I might do the easy part first, right? But I find that sometimes you wear yourself out, like it takes a little bit of energy, so you might want to do the challenging bits first, all right? So everybody clear on how the tools work? Okay, well, you need to know that, but it's kind of the boring part. Let's look at the art part. Now it becomes like a cooking show. What might your artwork look like? This is a sketch, as if you had done the drawing yourself. This is a cell phone photograph, right? I said you could use photographs as your sources. Absolutely. You could make a tracing of your photograph if you don't feel like you have good, strong drawing skills. It's completely fine. Any subject matter is fine. I personally love those agave century plants. I think they're really cool looking. So I have probably 20 pictures of them on my phone. This is a perfect use for them, turn it into a visual thing. So we will either print out the photograph itself at the right size, this is 8 by 10, or you'll make your drawing at that 8 by 10 size. Either way, the next thing I would do is make a tracing. Yeah? Simple tracing paper, you can see right through it. The reason I like to do this is because anything that you carve on your plate, the imagery is going to reverse when you print it. So it might not matter if it's just a plant or a flower or a landscape, but if it's a person's face or if there's text in the image, then you absolutely want to reverse it. So here I just took my tracing and flipped it over, right? So this way I can see what the image is going to look like, and it'll print the way I'm accustomed to seeing it in the photograph I took originally, okay? Everybody up to speed there? That's pretty easy. Here's one I started earlier. It is like a cooking show, right? This is that same tracing, flipped the opposite way. It's taped to my lino, and this guy in between is what we call transfer paper. We used to call it carbon paper back in the day. This, do you see how it's darker on one side and kind of shiny on the other? All right, it's dark side down. What's on here, if I rub it with my finger, it's on, can you see that? It's all kind of, that's what's in your pencil, right? That makes a mark when you draw with a pencil. That's graphite. Anywhere that I put pressure on this side, even if I use my fingernail, is going to transfer that mark below. All right, so this is really not rocket science. Cut the transfer paper, tape it to your plate, dark side down, tracing, flipped over, tape it, and then you trace those lines. And then you can see I've got some of the lines already in there, yeah? Easy, easy way to transfer the image. You would do the same thing to wood. Then, I would do that. This is Sharpie. I've just gone in there and colored it in. And that may seem like a ridiculous step to you guys, but I honestly promise you this will save you some effort. Color in what's going to stay black, and then you won't accidentally cut through it. You'll remember, oh wait, I can't cut there. I also do a little cross-hatching to show you where I want to make like a gray or a texture. So I know where the image has to be white, where it has to stay black, and where I'm going to do some fancy pants carving. Like a cooking show, here's one I've already started. So you can see like what the process ultimately looks like. This one's almost finished. So ultimately, the idea here is that you're removing the material, right? And then when it's time to print, we're going to roll ink across there with a brayer, and then we'll print it by hand to paper. Let's do that, shall we? This guy is my registration table. The registration table is really, really useful for our purposes because it'll help us keep the paper and the plate in the same relative position one to the other. So normally, This is my self-portrait from the pandemic, right? So I look kind of worried and scared. This one actually won a prize, so that's probably good, and there was money attached, which was better. So at any rate, something good came out of the pandemic for me. This is what I'm gonna print for you guys today, but notice it's not backed. So if I put it into my registration table, I can line up my paper with this outer edge, but there is a pretty big gap there. So it does work a little more easily if you have a piece that's backed, or if you stack something underneath it, like some sheets of cardstock, or in this case, I can kind of use a piece of wood to line it up. Normally, I would cut the paper ahead of time. This is 1.5 inches wide on each side. So my plate is 8 by 10. I'm going to add 1.5 inches to the top and the bottom, 1.5 inches to the left and right. So you're adding 3 inches total to each dimension. So an 8 by 10 becomes an 11 by 13. Does that make sense to everybody? I wrote that on the board as well somewhere. It's over there somewhere. At any rate, what I would like to do is not do any inking on the registration table. Ink the plate up away from here and then bring it here so you can line the paper up. Can you guess why? Just by looking at it, you could see people ignored that advice last semester and got ink all over the whole freaking thing, which means that then that ink, if it's still wet, will get into your margin or yours when you trade it off to someone else, right? I'm gonna print today not on a pre-cut piece of paper that's sized for that 1.5 inch border. I'm gonna kind of eyeball it so that I can use nice rice paper. I love printing on rice paper for lino and woodcut because it's really thin. You see how delicate that is? It's really thin, but it's relative to its thinness, it's really strong. So it's perfect for what we're doing here. So I'm going to let my paper sit over to the side. I'll bring the table back in a second. And ink up this plate. Grab one scrap piece of paper real quick. When we are printing our woodcut and linocut, we're going to use oil-based inks that are soap and water washable. If they get on your clothes, don't panic. If you put a little bit of our brush cleaner soap on it, kind of work it in, it will look silly when you go to your next class, but then when you get home, hit it with like Shout or some, stain stick, run it through the wash as soon as you can, right? And that should take care of it. If you don't notice it and it dries, sorry. So smocks are really good things. All right, I normally roll out my ink either on a piece of metal or a piece of glass. Today I think I'll use red to print this one because why not? That's what's in my hand, so that's what it's going to be. I put out about the size of the brayer itself. The brayer is the name for the roller. And please use this the right way. Don't squeeze it in the middle. You know those fights that happen in the bathroom, right? Like squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom, it preserves how much ink is in there. All right, I'm gonna roll the brayer back and forth. And the most common mistake that people make is putting way too much ink. And you'll know you have way too much if you don't hear kind of a sticky sound, and if the ink just kind of glides across there and you end up with long streaks of parallel lines. What it should do as you position it, and I sometimes have to lift it up, get it back in the ink to put it in a new position. I'll change directions. Do you hear that beautiful sizzle? That's the sound you should hear. If it sounds like you are frying bacon, then you're good to go. If you don't hear that, then you probably have too much ink. Most of these brayers, because it's a common workspace and multiple people are using it, these often get thrown into the sink, and so sometimes they're dented in the middle. Sometimes they don't ink up as well in the very center. But all you're doing now is rolling the ink onto your plate. You don't have to recharge after every stroke, but you can see why I want something on the table to catch the excess ink when I fall off the plate. I printed this yesterday and I left some ink on it. This is oil-based ink, so there was no way it was going to dry just between last class and this one. But that should speed us up a little bit for printing. Usually the first one you print from any plate is going to print a little light and then get increasingly darker. You can over ink, you can under ink. All of those things are things you kind of learn experientially as you do this, but that looks pretty good to me. I can kind of test it by tilting it in the light to see if I notice any areas that are kind of matte. The beard looks a little matte. So I want a little more ink in there. That should be okay. Table. So normally you'd pop your plate into that corner and then you'd use your outside table guide to help you line up the paper. Now obviously this is not exactly the right proportions. So normally I would use that corner to align it. I'm going to cheat and eyeball it, but you understand why I'm doing this, right? Trying to keep everything relatively straight so we have a margin around the outside. Once it touches down, don't try to move it. If it's crooked, let it be, because if you move it, it will pick up some ink and then reposition and you'll end up with a double impression. I'm going to slide it out from there now because I don't need to try to do the burnishing while it's in that corner. But can you guys see already that where I had my hand, it's already darker? So the pressure that I've put on there just by hand has already started to transfer the image. We have two different tools for rubbing the back for burnishing. This is called a baron. This is called a spoon. You're familiar. I like the spoon best personally, but this guy is kind of nice because it's soft. So it's good for starting out. Give you a nice base. I usually try to work kind of in a circle from the center outward. And that may be enough to pull a decent print for today. Now, before I decide to just pull it off and see what's happening, always check yourself before you wreck yourself. Put your hand down on it so the plate and the paper stay in the same position and peel it up. Can you see that corner is didn't get as much pressure, so I need a little more there. There's a little gap there. You can do that in each direction, you know, see if there's any weak area and make adjustments. I don't think I have too much terrible. It's pretty good, actually. I can use my spoon. You can really see on the rice paper, you can kind of see the ink absorbing into the paper. So this should be a pretty nice and dark print, in theory. Can you use too much pressure? Yes. Can you tear the paper accidentally? Yes. You kind of have to know your plate, and you're the one who designed it, you're the one who carved it, so you'll know. I'm not going to go crazy with pressure where there's a big white space. Be careful on the corners and the edges. Those are the places you're most likely to tear. If there's a foreign object, like a piece of ink that skins over dry, or if there's a piece of linoleum or wood cut material that gets onto the ink, it'll show up kind of on your print as like a little dot of ink surrounded by a white area around it, like a target. You can usually pick those out if you are testing it like this, remove it, put it back down, and take care of that by hand. I don't really see that happening much in mine, I don't think. Just complaining about the beard. Maybe I should give it a little more pressure. There we go. Almost there. Risk it and just pull it without double checking, but you can double check as much as you feel you need to. Boom. Yeah? So you can really quickly get a pretty decent result if you plan ahead of time right? I didn't ink on this surface, so I'm not going to get ink into the margins for the next person. But again, notice that I'm facing two different directions, right? Whatever's on the image on the plate, it's going to be the opposite way on the print. So that covers woodcut, linocut. We're good there, right? You may want to come in a little closer even for this next bit. I'm just going to show examples by former students. The collagraph. This is next to the last thing that we'll do. And to me, the collagraph is really kind of a fun opportunity. This is a collagraph plate that we didn't get around to printing. But I wanted you to see it because it's sealed with spray paint. And that is an important step. That way there's something on this surface that the ink will then be repelled by. It won't absorb in because of that there. This is essentially, remember, collagraph sounds like collage. This is the kind of style where we're taking a piece of essentially cardboard or paper. This is mat board. So it's multiple layers of good quality paper laminated together. But it's still, compared to wood, it's relatively soft. If you look closely, you can see some lines in there that have been drawn by using a metal point pen and kind of pressing hard in there. We've also glued in some elements. Those are bread ties. And then they drew little triangles on top to make them look like houses. So this would be a printable plate. We just didn't get around to printing it. I want to send that around so you can just get a sense of what it looks like up close. And sort of have these in a particular order. In my mind, I do. Here we go. This is the one I usually like to start with. It's kind of cheesy. It's a little kitty cat. But it's an easy enough design to figure out. This one is a mat board where we have turned it the wrong way around. This is the color side. This is the inside, what was white originally. And all we're doing here after the drawing was done on there is taking an X-Acto knife and just cutting lightly through one layer of the paper and peeling that off. So essentially this becomes like a woodcut or a linocut. It's really pretty simple, all right? So that one then gets printed in 3 different ways. Now normally I ask you to keep the same color for the first 3 steps. These are not done that way, but can you see the result here, right? In this case, we took the ink on a brayer, rolled it across the plate. The raised up part that wasn't cut catches the ink and it prints the image. So this is like what I would call, thank you, our relief roll. Switching gears, do you see how this is now kind of the reverse of that? Isn't that weird? Like the ink is now in the grooves and we have plate tone left on the raised up sections. This is what I would call the intaglio style inking, where it's down in the grooves and wiped off the raised parts. Normally I would do the first one in a lighter color than this and then use that same color for testing here, right? But this person decided to go a different way. Every time you change colors, you're gonna have to wash the plate, so you wanna probably plan as you're printing. This is my favorite way of doing it though. I'm not in love with those as a color combo, but in this inking, we took blue, scraped it into the grooves, right? Wiped it off of the raised areas, and then rolled red with a brayer over that surface. So we got 2 colors at the same time. So you've got your relief roll, intaglio roll, combo, right? So this is one of the absolute easiest techniques, the cut and peel method. No problem. That's an easy peasy one. Another technique that is super easy is this. This one is cut and glued cardstock, like the thickness of what we print postcards and business cards and stuff on. So it's not a really huge, thick relief, right? This one you could print all 3 of those same ways. That's really an easy one. Here's one that is thicker object. And you can kind of get a sense here of what we're going for to keep things out of the landfill, right? This is like the backing of a notebook that would otherwise maybe be recycled or thrown away. So we're kind of repurposing things, bits of string, there's some fabric in there. This piece, I'm going to pass this around so you can see a variety of different collage elements being used. This one is one of my personal favorites. It is a relatively high collage. This is a piece of mat board on top of mat board, but all of this stuff that looks like moon craters was made with hot glue. And then when it's inked, whoa, it looks kind of like an outer space stellar kind of image. So you don't have to use fancy materials to get something that you might actually really like. Another thing you can do, and this is not a great design, it's just an example of how it works, is what we call embossment. I used for this piece the kind of collars that come around when you buy multiple like jugs of spaghetti sauce or something at a big box store. So I had one that had 2 circles in it, and I just put that on top of a piece of mat board, another board on top, and ran it through the gray press. And if you look at the back, you can kind of see that it's really pressed it in there, right? So when I relief roll it, the part that was pressed in stays white. If I intaglio wipe it, the inside, the incised or embossed area goes dark. And if I use 2 colors, which is my absolute favorite way to do this, I can get 2 colors for the price of 1 from 1 plate, and it fills in the incised area and the relief area at once. So again, not that this is a great design, but it shows you the concept, right? So that's basically how the collagraph works. I also included for you in your collagraph folder a demo that I shot on my iPhone at the start of the pandemic of me in my kitchen making this. Can you tell what that stuff is here? Yeah, it's the like kind of fabric netting thing that they sell fruits and vegetables in, like oranges or onions or avocados, right? So with this one, I did a little bit of everything. I incised some lines, drew them in with my pen. I cut and pasted cardstock. I put in some glued in fabric. Anything that's relatively soft can be glued in as long as it's low relief. Fabric, lace works great. Green leaves work great, so as long as they're not dried and crunchy, they work fantastically. In the teeth, I did the cut and peel method. So I also included some examples online of different printings of that plate. That is, I think, the relief printing. No, that's my relief printing, which is probably the better one. My combo was pretty okay. These are just to test and see what it's doing. So I'm going to ask everybody, when you do the collagraph, do all 3 tests. Do a relief, do an intaglio, do a combo, and then decide what looks best. And the reason for that is here. This is one of my favorite ones from the past, and it's such a simple idea, right? Sea turtle. He's made from relatively thick, and sort of similar to the one that has the whale in it. It's a relatively thick cardstock that's being used here, or mat board rather. We have one piece that's the shape of the turtle, his whole silhouette, and then the other are those little parts of the design of the shell. This stuff that looks like nature is literally wadded up paper towel. And then we just glued it down, spray painted the whole thing so that ink wouldn't absorb into the paper, let it dry overnight, and then here's your relief roll, which is beautiful, I think. You know, it kind of looks like a woodcut, kind of an intricate design, not bad. The next printing that this student did was his intaglio wiping, which looks, I think, even better, because he was able to get the ink down in the grooves and get a little plate tone on the raised up parts. That's kind of cool, right? The next one, again, I don't love the color choice. We only did this to test what it would do, but this is when he really thought, okay, now I've got it. I'll put one color down in the grooves and then hand color the parts on the top. So again, this is maybe not super pretty. The ones I'm about to show you are the ones he thought were bad, which I stole out of the garbage can when he left after class. How is that bad? I love this piece, right? So, I mean, this is trash. This is paper towel and trash, but it made art, right? And each one of those is printed a little bit differently, right? I mean, I like this one better than that one, but I wouldn't have thrown that away either, you know? All right, So that's what your collagraph can be. It can be kind of a fun thing. All right? That's project 7 out of 8. Let me show you how to do number 8. The last thing we're going to do is monotype. With monotype, you're not making a repeated image like a full edition. Thank you. Monotype is all about just manipulating the ink on the surface. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't. Behind me are the ones I did for yesterday's class. I'm going to show you how to do the additive process, the subtractive process, and the trace or drawn from behind process. We'll all try these out when we do this project. We have 2 days set aside for it. We'll experiment with them. You'll turn in your best from each of those methods, and the other 2 that you're turning in for that assignment will be whatever are your favorite method. Personally, I really like the subtractive. The additive is a little hard for me, but you're going to find that you'll favor one over the other. Everybody in here, though, can do the trace method. Never had anybody completely fail on that. It's literally, it's tracing. That's all you have to do. Okay, so for this one, I need another batch of images. I'm going to work from a sketch that I've already done. I always do skulls for this one, but that's just me, right? Hello. And in order to work with this, I'm using plexiglass. It doesn't have to be fancy. And I'm going to put my guide right underneath the glass, right, so that I have something to work from. All right? So if you guys will bear with me, I'm going to get some colors out here. I'm going to try to make some ART for you. I'm using the Akua brand inks for the additive process. These have been sitting over the summer, so they may need to be mixed up a little bit. This one has separated from its pigment, so we need to stir that up. This is yellow. Doesn't look like it right now. There we go. Much better. The pigment is heavier than the liquid content of your inks, and so they will separate if they sit. And if that happens, you just stir them up, and we're good to go. I'm using this guy as a palette. All right, so some yellow, some red. You need to be mixed too, of course you do. The Akua ink is much more liquid than the oil-based inks. You notice that right away. Just slopped a bunch on the table. That's fun. What other colors do I have? Black, straight. Some white. I could stand more mixing, but for now, just for the sake of speed. All right, so I have some color to work with. I have some brushes. What I'm going to do now is kind of paint this image, but you want to keep it fairly thin, because if you're painting super thick, when you press the paper on it, it's just going to bloop, right? And it's just going to spread out from its size. So let's try making a little yellow and white mixed together to make kind of a bone color. It's creepy. I'm working relatively quickly, but this ink does not dry really fast, so I don't have to rush. But we are getting down to the end of our period. Kinda, yeah. It's almost like you're making a small painting, right? So of course, I usually get the question right now, then why don't you just paint on paper? Because you can work in layers, you can get some different effects than you would if you were using like watercolor or something else. Let me just give this guy some teeth. That looks pretty cool. There we go. All right, and now maybe I want a little bit darker base color in the eye sockets. Maybe I want it to be a little scary. I'm so ready for Halloween already. I'm done with how hot it is. Enough.
It's looking at Ronald McDonald.
It does, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Ronald McDonald may be in the darkest pits. Paper over here. Well, let's use you. I don't have to use a lot of pressure right now because I've got a pretty thin page. Now, for 5 minutes of painting, that's pretty okay, right? Now, I can keep adding to this, and that's what I did with this one. So let me show you how you do adding to something that already has color on it. Swap this out. First, I'm going to put my image down and put a new plate right on top of it. And I'm going to grab a dry erase marker, and I'm going to trace what's on here, on this side of the screen, or the plate rather. So I can kind of see where stuff should be. All right, and then this is pretty critical. Now that I've made that tracing, I'm going to flip it over. So I'm adding the ink to this side so that it'll match when I put it back to the paper. So I can make any additions that I need to. Maybe we can clean him up a little bit with some black. Let's try what happens if we do this. A little Darth Vader-ish. Maybe I need a little more coverage underneath that one eye socket. For the sake of time, we'll just do this and flip it over, line it up through the back, press, slide it a little bit, give it a little pressure from here, and right, it starts to cover up that one little weird block. Like, so I can just keep adding layer after layer after layer. So that's the basics of the additive. My personal favorite, though, really is the subtractive method. And to do that, I'm going to use a little bit different approach. I'm going to take black oil-based ink. rather than the Akua, and I'm going to roll it out across the plate with my brayer until I get as close to an even layer as I can.
Does it matter which ink you use with each brayer?
I try to use just one per color, but I mean they can be washed and interchanged, and we have bunches of them.
So
But.
you can use oil or...
Oh yeah. With these, yes. I went through a phase where I tried to keep them separate and it wasn't working, so. All right. So I have a pretty even coverage there of black. So now, how the heck am I supposed to see my drawing, right? So I made a stencil. That makes my life a lot easier. So if I place that where I want it to be, and then where's that little rag? I can use like the butt end of a paintbrush, wrap it with some fabric, and I can trace the guides that I need. So I know where stuff is. Again, I'm going a little quick, but if I hold that up to the light, can you guys see the lines that I just put in there? Right? So I can see my guide pretty well from this side. I could then use something like my ink knife, and that makes pretty interesting marks. I can use that to really pull out, scrape off the ink to make his top of his skull. I can use the fabric itself to really finesse this and make some areas really clean white and others a little bit gray. Teeth are going to look a little bit like chiclets, but I think we're going to have to live with that. I might do a little fancy pants to the background. That ought to look kind of cool. So again, this is something you'd never get as a painting, right? You're manipulating just the ink. Maybe it's a little shave right there. I think I like this one. Remember I said additive wasn't my favorite, but I like the subtractive? You'll find the thing that you like the most, I'm sure. Yeah, that's more me. I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so there's our subtractive. Okay, so last thing, and this is the no-fail. No one ever messes this up. It's almost impossible to mess this up. You're going to then put out a layer of ink, but just not super thick. So a little bit less than what I would normally have used for my subtractive method. I'm just going to try to even this out. Then my printing paper is directly on all of that ink. All right, now I'm not going to put a ton of pressure. I'm just placing it as lightly as I can on there. And then I can go back to my original source. Anything that I put pressure on it from this side is going to start picking up ink from the other. So normally, I try to use like a ballpoint pen. I'm gonna stick my fingers in its eye sockets, which are supposed to be dark anyway, so that should hold things in place. You can definitely see from this side where my marks are going to be. But I don't even have to use a pen. I could use the back end of this brush. I could use my finger. Right? Simple, but pretty fun. And you can see, you see when I used my finger, it gave kind of a different texture than when I was using something that was a little sharper. So that's your 3 approaches to monotype. When we do the monotype, they don't have to be the same image every single time. It's just faster for a demo for me to do the same thing. But that's virtually everything. We did a little bit of every single project today. Hopefully, you might be a little overwhelmed, but hopefully you're excited and there's something that you're really getting excited about doing when we go forward. So Tuesday, when I see you next time, bring in your plexi, bring in your ideas. I'll work with you one-on-one to help you decide what's the best approach, and we should start making art, and I can stop. Have a great weekend. You're welcome. Thank you. Email me if you have questions, guys.